Good afternoon. For my final presentation, I would like to speak to you about Methodism in America. As I was researching my family history a few years back, I found out that my ancestors, William and Nehemiah Price, invited John Wesley to come to Ireland to spread the teaching of Methodism, and later were appointed to his board of 100. Now that board in return appointed ministers in the Methodist Church. I did not have a lot of knowledge about Methodism, what Methodism entailed, and the impact that it had on American culture. Nathan Hatch argues that Methodism is the most powerful religious movement in American history, and its growth is a central feature in the emergence of the United States as a republic. Methodism is a denomination that has its founding with the brothers John and Charles Wesley within the Church of England in the 18th century. John Wesley set out to change the religious fervor in the colonies and carried his teachings to America in 1735. This was the beginning of a period in American history known as the Great Awakening. Methodists were known as dissenters of the Protestant faith, as it did not believe in the Calvinistic teachings that dominated the religious atmosphere at the time. Methodist ministers traveled over the colonies preaching the teachings of the Bible, including God's grace of redemption. Their teaching emphasized outward Christian living as a sign of a conversion of one's heart. They are to serve one another, their community, and then the world. During the time of the Great Awakening, Methodism moved to the frontier. The congregation grew by accepting people of all backgrounds, including slaves. Slaves were encouraged to participate in services alongside their white counterparts and go through the process of conversion. Prior to the War of Independence, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury were sent to unite the congregations of Methodists according to the model of John Wesley. The growth on the frontier slowed with the introduction of America's War for Independence. As the war waged on, Wesley, who was an opponent of the war, called back all the Methodist ministers to England. Asbury refused to leave, staying the duration of the war in Delaware. Following the war, Methodism split off from the Anglican Church, which led directly to the foundation of the Methodist Episcopal Church of America. In 1786, James Haw and Benjamin Ogden were assigned as the first Methodist traveling preachers in Kentucky. By the end of that year, they reported there were 90 people in the area. 10 years later, there were 7 circuits in Kentucky and Tennessee, with about 1,300 members, and the Western Conference was added to the bounds of the Methodist Episcopal Church to embrace this territory. It was not until 1798 that John Kobler was sent as the first traveling preacher in the Old Northwest. In 1800, the Western Conference contained 9 circuits throughout Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio, with 14 interments under William McKendree. By 1811, the circuits had increased from 9 to 69, the number of preachers grew from 14 to 100, and the membership in the church grew from 2,800 to over 30,000 people. It was also at the end of the War of Independence that a freed Delaware slave named Richard Allen helped to establish the African Methodist Episcopalian Church in Philadelphia. Richard Allen was an assistant minister and held prayer meetings for blacks in St. George's Church in Philadelphia. There he worshiped beside the whites and other blacks. However, the atmosphere began changing. As more blacks were being introduced into the church, they were being limited in their worship and their service. It was at this time that he decided to begin the African Methodist Episcopalian Church in 1794. Allen became the first African American to be ordained in the ministry of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Before returning to England, Francis Asbury helped form a union of circuit riding preachers who went further along the frontier to minister to groups of people who had no leadership. The Methodist circuit riders began reaching the American frontier, riding on horseback to reach every nook and cranny of the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River Valley. The most famous of the circuit riding preachers is Peter Cartwright. Peter Cartwright was assigned the circuit in Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, and Ohio. At a place called Cane Ridge in 1801, Cartwright was converted. At once he joined the Methodist Episcopal Church. Within 2 years, he became a circuit riding preacher, bringing the gospel to the frontier. He held camp meetings defending the Methodist beliefs and speaking out against slavery. He was not an abolitionist. He just did not believe in the institution of slavery. He helped usher in revivals known as the Second Great Awakening. To answer a desperate need for more preachers, he helped in the creation of Methodist colleges. By the end of his career, he had preached over 15,000 sermons. Another itinerant preacher for the Methodist Church was Lorenzo Dow. Eccentric and most fascinating, Lorenzo was referred to as Crazy Dow. Lorenzo had long hair and a long beard. He was arrogant and contemptuous. When he originally applied to the Western Conference, he was denied. After another plea to the conference, they received him on a trial basis. In 1804, he cultivated the camp meeting into an institution in Virginia. Quickly afterwards, he left America to go to England, abandoning the post that he had been given. Upon his return to America, he asked for entrance into the conference again. This time he was denied, and the churches were told not to let him speak. He was a friend to the oppressed. When traveling in the South, he was given rest by a black man. While residing in the quarters, he heard that a black pastor had been whipped and imprisoned. Dow went to the church and he preached himself. He lived in the black community socially. He opposed slavery and considered it a violation against the laws of nature. He further denounced churches for the discrimination against blacks in their churches. By the beginning of the 19th century, the Methodist Church grew to be the largest denomination in America with more than 19,000 churches. It divided regionally prior to the Civil War over the issue of slavery. The Wesleyan Methodists and the Free Methodists of the North became abolitionists and advocates of the Underground Railroad. The decline of the Methodists from the religious atmosphere was contingent upon how the bishops had responded to one crisis after another, with delayed responses that often appeared to appease their political allies. The Methodist Church was trying to maintain its edge through political advocacy. However, aligning the confession of Jesus as Lord too closely with specific powers of this world often leads to the church being exploited as a political tool, and ultimately, when that tool is no longer needed, it is abandoned. So what did Methodism bring to America? Methodism, as stated before, emphasized putting love into action. Methodism helped reconstruct the church along voluntary lines. It defined the core of a democratic culture. It brought logic of capitalism and liberal individualism together where God's favor is poured out. And it represented religion in the most adaptable form. Methodists were the pace setters as they transcended class barriers and empowered common people to make religion their own through effective communication systems, participation by women, and the empowerment of African Americans. So we can agree with Nathan Hatch when he said, Methodism's growth is a central feature in the emergence of the United States as a republic. Thank you for joining me, and I pray God's blessings upon you as you continue in your studies.